Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamie Vogel. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing for Transportation Impact, and welcome to the next episode of our Let's Talk Ship discussion series. If you joined our last episode, welcome back. If this is your first time attending, welcome. Our team has developed this series with the goal of providing you with education, ideas, insights, and data related to the ever-changing shipping environment. So today we'll be discussing what is emerging in shipping technology and what exactly should be important to shippers today and why. My guest today is Norm Pollock, our very own Chief Technology Officer. Norm, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jamie. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Norm, I wanted to invite you today, not just because you have a 30-year tenure in IT, but you have a really strong ability to help companies align, and our company specifically, align technology with business goals. And you're excellent at process management. But one of the things I most appreciate about you, Norm, is your strong ability to put IT language into layman's terms for those of us who don't speak IT like me. So thank you again. Um, as we were prepping for this, we realized, you and I, through our discussions, we wanted to discuss most of the technologies we wanted to discuss actually work together. And as we dove deeper, we realized the foundation of all that was most important. So we want to really dive into the components of that foundation. But first, let's talk about those technologies. So what exactly are those technologies that work together, Norm?
As we discussed, many of the current and upcoming technologies do work hand in hand with each other, and you rarely implement just one. You really need to combine them to take full advantage. So, for example, machine learning, that feeds artificial intelligence. Data lakes, they feed machine learning. Chatbots, they take advantage of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And data lakes can also feed predictive analytics. So they all work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said this in our discussions, the foundation of all of those things being able to work together was really paramount. So what is the foundation needed for all those technologies to work together?
Well, the one thing that's needed for everything we do in technology today, it seems, is data. None of these latest technologies work without data, and the more data you can get, the better. The one thing that I see as a roadblock to taking advantage of these new technologies is data quality. Garbage in, garbage out. It is a cliche, but it definitely holds true with data. And if there's one thing I'd like to reinforce today, it's that companies should start working on their data quality immediately, even if they don't plan to use it for a year or more, because they're going to want their historical data to be accurate once they start to look at some of these technologies.
Mm-hmm.
An example of that is if you go a year from now and you decide, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do something with one of these new technologies that requires data, predictive analytics, for example, and you find out that timestamps are important, you can't go back and re-timestamp your old data. So it's important to think through those things now, make sure that your systems are starting to capture the correct data, and then you'll have the data when you need it. The other thing is really just the quality of the data itself. Making sure that things are consistent. We've received a lot of data from customers over the years to match up with carrier data and so forth. And there's sometimes we get data and we're unable to match a full 20% of the data just because it's not of good quality.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So let's dig into that just a little bit. Can you give us an example of where you see opportunities that a shipper can make improvements to their data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the worst data we see comes from TMSs. I think the reason is there seems for some reason just not to be that much integration work done between the systems that generate the orders and the TMS themselves. And so what happens is in the warehouses, the team of logistics people that are entering the orders, they might get hand printed pick tickets. They're getting printouts. And what they're doing is someone saying, hey, what's the name and address? And they yell out the name, it's ESCO, for example. and it might get entered as ESCCO, ESKO, ESCO. You know, that means once we get the data, and I mean, I've seen as many as 13 different spellings for one company name come in the data. And, you know, when companies ask us to do analysis on that type of data, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, you know, the address themselves that originate from the TMS are often inconsistent. So we can't even match up and say, okay, well, the company name's wrong. Are they the same company because the address is the same? You know, so some real
Mhm.
issues with TMSs, and I think that everybody, you know, that has a TMS should seriously consider connecting through an API or some other method. I think it's really important to connect that data back to your ordering system.
Ordering system.
Um, you know, the next one that really should be pretty easy for parcel shippers using a manifestation. You know, we find that with parcel shippers, uh, you know, they have a large number of shipments. And so often, usually, parcel manifestations are already connected to the ERP or the order management system. But what we don't see shippers taking advantage of is fields called reference fields that you can populate. You know, customers
Mm.
should really be taking advantage of those by populating them with information that's specific to them. For example, it could be their customer number, invoice
Mhm.
number, order number. Once they populate those types of values, the reference data will get sent to the carriers. And then when those carrier files, the package level details downloaded, that can be paired up and tied to the tracking numbers, and it allows that data to then be used for analysis. You know, so I'd really like to see more shippers take advantage of that opportunity to match the shipper data to their ERP so that it can be used for more analytics. And you know, even if you do run out of available fields, I mean, I've seen where, you know, some people want to use 7, 8, 9 fields. You can still put multiple fields within a single field just by separating them with something like a pipe symbol or a colon, something that separates those within the reference field. Now a single reference field can actually act as 2 or 3 fields. So
Yeah.
that would be incredibly valuable for shippers to do that for the back end analytics opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier you said there were two important reference fields, your measured carton dimensions and your measured carton weight, because carriers aren't
Yeah,
always right.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. You know,
Yep.
if they could send in their actual weight that they achieved on their manifestation and their carton dimensions, what we can do then is go back and audit those to see whether or not they were charged correctly. For example, if you fill in a reference field for the weight that you weighted at 6 pounds and the carrier says they rated it at 8 pounds, we may have an argument there to get a refund on that difference. And I've actually heard that with some clients that, you know, in some cases they're like, everything I ship is in a 4-inch diameter tube, but the carrier keeps putting it as 6 inches. Because it's round, maybe the carrier can't effectively measure it. And
Hmm.
so that's a refund opportunity for that as well, especially if it adds up to dimensional charges.
Yeah, absolutely. Arm yourself with that data. So, you know, what I'm hearing is, outside of AI, machine learning, chatbots, some of the other technologies that you described when we started, there's really one standout technology that shippers really need to understand, and that's analytics. So, to set the stage here to continue the conversation centered around that, what are the types of analytics?
Yeah, so you know, analytics that may not sound like a new thing to a lot of people. And that's because it is becoming pretty commonly available. But the difference is there are different degrees of capability. And in the IT world, we call it analytics maturity. So, you know, the start of everyone's analytics program is descriptive. And this is just simply data visualization. And really all it does is provide a look at your data to look back at what happened. The next level of maturity is diagnostics, and that's also looking back, but it also offers a reason as to why something happened. The third level is predictive, and that's about when something will happen and really provides insight to the user on when something will happen. The highest level maturity model is described as prescriptive, and that allows anyone to perform what if scenarios and advise on possible outcomes of those scenarios.
Hmm. Yeah, answers those questions that a shipper might have. So let's break those down, each of those down a little bit further. So one of our services, and frankly, a service all shippers should be utilizing, is our parcel audit and optimization dashboard. So where does that fit in?
So the Parcel Audit currently provides descriptive and diagnostic capabilities. It provides descriptive information through visualizations as well as the reporting tools. This is very valuable because many companies, even though they have their own analysts that can parse carrier data, those analysts may not be that familiar with what their data represents or how to tie it together correctly. And I've heard from managers that they receive reports from their analysts that just quite frankly don't add up, and they have to go back and either go back to the analyst and educate them on how things work, or they may actually get it from us at a later time as well. In addition to the visual capabilities we provide, we also provide something called optimizations. And these are a very powerful diagnostic tool. And what they do is identify and suggest opportunities within a client's shipping profile that they can use to cut shipping costs. A quick example is address corrections. So, I'll use B2B shippers as an example. My last company was a B2B company, so we saw this quite a bit. We had some 15,000 customers, and some of them been with us, quite honestly, 30 plus years. So, many B2B shippers, they've been shipping to the same address for year after year, thinking they had the correct address. However, the city they're shipping to may have had a zip code split. I know that Dallas is one of those cities that we see pop up quite a bit, actually. And so what happens is they continue to ship to the old zip code when in reality it may have changed by 1 or 2 digits. So the carrier, they're going to continue to deliver to that address, but what they're going to do is hit you with an address correction fee of $17 for every single package. So, we see that these types of fees can get very high, and the optimization identifies both the amount of the savings that can be realized, but also, provides a report that can be used to make those corrections within your system. And once they're corrected, the charges will permanently go away. So we have quite a few optimizations available today, and we're creating new ones all the time as well. So anytime we can identify a way to diagnose a problem and then provide a method to correct it, we create optimization, which is really that next level of analytics. No longer do you have to go and hunt for the solution. We're giving you that solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that optimization advice. One example of a B2C shipper, we were actually on site doing a demo for a shoe company, and we had the CEO in the room, and we're demoing their data within the tool, and their warehouse is on one side of the street and their office is on the other side of the street. So someone in their office was overnighting shoes that they wanted to the office from the warehouse across the street. So overnight, expensive service. And the address was wrong. They were getting assessed the address correction every time. And our tool showed that within the meeting. He wasn't super happy about it, but I'll never forget that story.
It's amazing the type of things you come across.
Yeah, amazing. So let's dive in a little bit to predictive analytics. You had a really good example this morning we were talking that I'd love for you to describe for our audience.
Okay, yeah. So, um, you know, basically the capability does exist to do this, one that I'm going to describe here. But it's not something generally available. It's something we do on an ad hoc basis.
Yeah.
But, predictive analytics, what it is it's to attempt to determine the likelihood of a certain outcome based on history. Okay. So using history, you attempt to predict future outcomes. So one example of that is where we can measure on-time delivery for every package our clients have sent, not just one client, but all of the clients. Now, using this, we can evaluate which zip code pairs may have a problem with on-time delivery for specific carriers or service. For example, I pulled up a client this morning that was shipping from New Jersey to Arizona, and overall, about 11% of their packages were late. But when I dug into the various services, one service really stood out, which was next day air. It was late 86% of the shipments for that one carrier.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
using this kind of historic data and incorporating, for example, time of year, maybe some additional dimensions, we can make predictions and even suggest to clients to use an alternate carrier potentially, or an alternate service type when shipping to certain zip codes from a certain origin zip. You can see how this could be extremely valuable for like a medical company, or for a company that services weddings or other events. So in order to perform, predictive analytics, the more data you can obtain, the better. Predictive capabilities really rely on big data, data warehouses, data lakes, et cetera, to do well.
Yeah. As long as the data is clean, right? We keep going back to that. We keep going back to
That's
that.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. You have to have clean data.
Hmm. So as it relates to prescriptive analytics, I think that sometimes that terminology gets confusing just in general, but for
Mhm.
shippers also. So even you and I this morning when we were talking, we talked through it this morning on what it actually is. So
Right.
I'd love for you to describe what prescriptive analytics is.
Well, I think the easiest way to think of prescriptive analytics is modeling. And this is another thing that I'll just digress for a second. When you look at technology and they keep coming out with words like the cloud and machine learning and all of these things, there's often a little bit of difference in opinions on what they actually mean and are. But I think from my perspective, I think of prescriptive analytics as modeling. So what that does is we look at what if scenarios with the objective to provide what are the possible outcomes of those scenarios. So a good example of this level of sophistication would be running through scenarios to determine where to locate one or more distribution centers. Your inputs could be, all past inbound and outbound shipping activity, as well as the zip codes of the potential site locations. Um, Outputs would include the predicted shipping costs as well as the predicted time in transit to your existing customer base. We could even throw in some other factors like what percent you expect to either lose some customers because maybe they're now farther away from the warehouse, and what percent could you expect to gain customers because they're now closer. So, there's a lot you can do with those types of things. They get quite complicated. Another example, could be moving shipments from national carriers to regional carriers to determine the predicted impact on overall shipping spend and time in transit. So, these types of analysis can get extremely sophisticated. They can be somewhat time consuming. At least in today's world, they still do require a human to work with the system. We do have systems that can do that type of thing, but there is some manual work involved. But that is why they are at the top of the maturity model. And at some point in the future, it's possible that these types of things could become more mainstream.
Yeah, and I hope they do because and it can answer prescriptive analytics. I'm as much as I'm a salesperson, I'm also kind of a data nerd. So I love data and I love being able to, analyze and see where things are. My sales team will tell you. Prescriptive analytics can also answer questions like what products should I launch and when? What kind of sales or offers should we make to customers or each individual customer? So think about how powerful that could be for an e-com retailer. If a company knew that after a Sunday night email campaign, their New York clients were more likely to buy before 11 a.m. on Monday, but only when there's a discount present. But at the same time of day, their Texas clients will buy at full price. So, boom, dynamically change your
Right.
website, train the sales team, and you've just increased profitability, just all based on prescriptive analytics. And so,
Right.
I think at the end of the day, the first three that you described, diagnostic, descriptive, diagnostic, prescriptive, they all really build on each other, right? So to get to prescriptive analytics. But companies that are utilizing prescriptive analytics are very likely accomplishing a couple of things: getting the most out of their data, better decision making, and ultimately, at the end of the day, probably getting ahead of their competitors, right?
Absolutely.
Mhm. So I'm going to see if we've got any questions that we can answer for our audience. So one question that we have, Norm, is, as we are talking about analytics, are there specific tools that a shipper can use to build out some of these analytics on their own?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of them. I like Click. I've been using that for a long, long time. QLIK, not to confuse that with CLICK. But Click Sense is the newest version. There's also one called Click View. Not necessarily going into the difference, but I think Click Sense would be the way to go. Tableau is another extremely popular one out there. Another one that is more for building, maybe websites would be SizeSense. There's a large number. I think you can go to several sites and find an entire list pretty quickly. But I think Click and Tableau are two of the market leaders. Power BI is another biggie, out recently, not that long ago, by Microsoft as well.
Mm-hmm. So someone also had a question about reference fields. If we can maybe go over what those reference fields were again, that would be important. And so I'm going to
Yeah,
flip back.
absolutely. So, you,
Yeah, go ahead.
did you want to clarify it some more, or do you that?
No, yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
All right. So yeah, the manifest software itself, you take PeerBridge, any of these types of, CMS Global Soft, there's a large number of manifest systems out there. And within those, when you're filling in the screen, now I know, what we used was we transferred data directly from our ERP in my past life. And we would just use a scanner to scan the barcode on the package. And then we would immediately populate the screen presented by the manifest software. So, that we would populate not just the client name and the client address, but also on that screen, it would say reference one, reference two, reference three, reference four, and we would auto populate those. And so you want to be consistent. I've seen this done inconsistently, and that's just as troubling as not having it in some ways. Always, if you're going to put order number in reference field one, always use reference field one for order number. Don't interchange it with other things. If you're going to put invoice number in reference field two, always put invoice number and so forth. And that way, it's very easy to look at that data. But what happens is after it auto populates from your ERP, if you have a good integration, then what will happen is that manifest gets uploaded nightly to the carrier. And then every week that is made available on your invoice. And within the detailed invoice download that you're able to download from the carrier site, all those reference fields will exist inside the columns, and they'll populate exactly what you sent them. So the carrier does not modify or touch or utilize those reference fields in any way, but now they're there with a direct tie back to the exact package for you to do analysis on.
Such a great use case, and so powerful when clients are thinking about running some of these analytics through some of those tools that you just described.
Yeah, if you think about like customer number as an example, I mean, if you have the customer number, you can quickly in an analytics tool say roll up all the shipments to a specific customer number.
Right.
And if they're getting prepaid freight, for example, where you're paying the freight, you can see, what's the average cost per package. You can see what types of services they may be requesting and maybe being provided at no additional fee, things of that nature. There's a lot you can do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Norm, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down this afternoon. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have these conversations in person during this series sometime soon. So for our audience, this webinar will be available post this call via our follow-up email, as well as on our website. So those who provided their mailing address will receive a professional ship talker pin like I'm wearing today. If you did not provide your mailing address and you'd like a pin, you can just simply respond to our follow-up email to receive one. And we will be following up with our next Let's Talk Ship webinar, which will be in August. And so we hope to see you there.
Thank you.